My name is Keith Hirokawa. I'm a professor at Albany Law School, and here today with Professor Alexandra Harrington, also at Albany Law School. She is a prolific scholar and writer, a leader in the international environmental community. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about climate change. What I wanted to raise with you today is the pandemic. So far, on a global scale, we have approximately 218 million confirmed cases, which may be an undercount, with at least 4.5 million deaths due to the pandemic. And the question I have for you is, we read a lot of stuff about disease and pandemics as a climate change impact. How do pandemics relate to climate change?
That is such a really important question. Thank you for asking it, and for asking it in a way that's not kind of incredulous. So we know that as people start to come in closer contact with wild species, especially animals, we have a development of zoonotic diseases. So zoonotic diseases are diseases, they sound very exotic, they often are. They are diseases that can be transmitted from one species, typically some type of animal species, to humans. And when they are, we see things like we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, where it's often something that we as humans are not as well prepared to adapt to physically. And our immune systems are not necessarily as prepared for it because it is not a fully human originated illness. It's a type of illness coming from another species as well. What we know from clearing of spaces, what we know from encroachment of buildings into more rural areas, is that as we start to have intersections between human species and the human species and other species, this type of exposure becomes greater. And while we're still trying to figure out exactly what the cause of COVID-19 is or was, we know that pandemics in general are a very much climate-oriented issue. And as climate change has increased, and as we've seen this real push towards communities of different species coming together, we know that previous illnesses have been caused, for example, Ebola outbreaks in Africa in particular, have been caused by this type of push. And we also have a lot of data which tells us that this type of pandemic, while the numbers might hopefully be oddly high moving forward, will become more common if we don't find ways to limit these types of interactions.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying. Now, as we know, the IPCC recently issued its sixth assessment. Can you just briefly tell us who is the IPCC and what did they say in the recent report about pandemics?
Of course. So the IPCC is an international organization. It has member countries, so 195 at the moment member countries. It is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so hence IPCC. It's a lot easier to say. And amongst the many things that it said in this report, it did say that pandemics are an outgrowth of climate change, and climate science has now really been used to establish that the types of impacts from a warming planet include things like climate change. And then that includes different exposure points to pandemics and crossover illnesses in a way that we've often not seen before, especially when, as we've spoken about in some of our other discussions, when we've seen this idea of a cascading impact from climate. So one impacts a hurricane causing flooding, causing populations to move, et cetera, that then changes the way that biodiversity and humans interact. So the IPCC report really has given us the scientific knowledge we need to substantiate the idea that this is a pandemic caused by climate change.
Okay, well, so is it possible to get a head start on this? I mean, why is it that these pandemics aren't a little more predictable or easy to anticipate?
It's such a wonderful question, and I wish I had a perfect answer for that. I mean, in a way, some of them are, in the sense that we saw the development of a vaccine very quickly because after SARS-1, after the SARS-1 outbreak, scientists started to try to develop at least a base understanding of the SARS virus, so that when we do have something later on like COVID-19, which was SARS based, we could have a much kind of bigger step towards moving into the vaccine realm very quickly. It is difficult to pinpoint because we don't know the exact interactions that will cause a pandemic. We don't know the exact interactions that will spark an illness versus those that won't. The difference between Ebola and COVID is massive, and yet they both theoretically come from the same type of origin in a human interaction with another species. So we can't really tell where it will be or what it will be. And obviously for millennia, people have interacted with species to some degree and have consumed all sorts of meats, et cetera. We just don't know what that infection source will be.
Okay, so we have a lot of planning and research to do, it sounds like. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Professor, for meeting with us today and informing us about some really important issues. Again, this is Professor Alexandra Harrington, and we will see you next time right here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.